All right, and we are live. Hello, welcome back to the Ad Lib Podcast. Today is episode number 96, and today it will just be me on the podcast. Episode number 90. I can hear myself speak there. It's good to be back once more. Unfortunately, both Franco and Joe could not make it today, but still, I could only make it for a very, very short time today. So what we've got today is a review-only podcast. To be fair, not too much news has really come out this week. I mean, there was one trailer that did release this week that was interesting. The Amateur is the Rami Malek film, which looks good, but to be perfectly honest, not too much to say about it either. It's just a trailer that looks good. Check it out if you're interested in and you like Rami Malek. So with that, what am I going to be talking to you about today? Obviously, the big one is the Gladiator, right? The Gladiator released this weekend, I think on Thursday in Malta, and in most of Europe. Apparently it didn't release in the US though, which is interesting. It's an interesting decision. Making 78 million worldwide, not counting obviously the US. So a very strong opening. I believe the strongest international opening for a Ridley Scott film, with The Martian being the second, I believe. So that's a strong opening, right? And Gladiator has a strong name. But is it any good? Obviously, I will be reviewing it and talking about it later on. Apart from Gladiator 2, I will be reviewing a new series. It's a Dune series, which released on HBO Max last night, and that is Dune Prophecy. It is an HBO original series based on the Frank Herbert books, of course, of the same name, Dune. And yeah, I'll be reviewing that. I am not too knowledgeable about the lore. Of course, I have read the first book, but that's pretty much it on my end, to be honest. So obviously keep that in mind. But I'm a massive fan of the two Dune films. David Lynch film, a little less, to be honest. I can see obviously David Lynch himself was very critical of what happened on that film, and obviously there are issues of some of the visuals and so on, but I won't get into that. So that's where I stand as a Dune fan, and Dune Prophecy, my review will come later on as well. And also I will be reviewing Emilia Perez, which is a big Oscar hopeful. It's an interesting film. They take a lot of creative decisions in that film, and I will also be reviewing it and talking about its Oscar possibilities later on in the podcast. So, hope everyone is doing well. I hope the internet is okay as well. Seems to be fine right now. So I hope everyone is doing well. I am all good and Gucci. It's been a busy period of time for myself. Of course, as you know, I'm also currently studying, so lots of work on that end. Personal life and so on. So life is coming fast right now. But it's good to be on the podcast talking about films. That's what I love to do most of all. Shall we start off with review number one? And review number one for today will be actually the series, the Dune Prophecy series. So let's get into it. Dune Prophecy. This is, of course, a sci-fi TV series based on the Frank Herbert universe, the Dune universe. It is developed by, apologies if I completely destroy the name, but Diane Ademujon and Alison Shapker, of course, for HBO. It is based, as you can tell from the scene you're seeing right now, and from the title itself, based on the origins of the Bene Gesserit. And obviously the Bene Gesserit we saw in all the Dune films. They are this sisterhood, basically, of members who have this like superhuman power, this power to control people with their voice. They have different abilities, and it's a fascinating sect of people who use fate. We see them also train their members physically and mentally. So all those elements are very important. And basically, we see how this sect, the Bene Gesserit started off. And we see how they influence the politics of the world of Frank Herbert, the world of Dune, of course. And it's all very, very fascinating to watch, very interesting to watch. So, Dune Prophecy is, of course, in that case, a prequel series to the Denis Villeneuve Dune films. It does indeed feel like it is part of Denis Villeneuve's world. Definitely, the production design and the visuals and so on are not as strong, and now I'll obviously get into the details of the whole thing, are not as strong as the Denis Villeneuve films. But still, I think they do a pretty decent job with regard to the sets, the costumes, to make you feel like you are in Denis Villeneuve's world, right? So that's a very good thing. Now, the events of the series take place around 10,000 years before the events of the film. So it's a long time ago. Now, I have not read any of the other Dune books apart from the first Dune book. But apparently, from what I've read, that this series also brings in a lot of information from the Great Schools of Dune novel trilogy, which is apparently a novel trilogy by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, who continued working on obviously Brian Herbert is Frank Herbert's son, continued working on his father's works. And I think what we have here, like I said, we have Diane Ademu-John and Alison Shapker working on creating this TV series. I think we have a pretty decent show. So in it we have Emily Watson and Olivia Williams, Travis Fimmel, and Mark Strong starring in this show. So it's a pretty stacked cast. Emily Watson is our main protagonist, and she is the Mother Superior, named Valia Harkonnen. She's the leader of the Sisterhood, basically. And with her is Olivia Williams, that is Mother Superior's sister Tula Harkonnen. Of course, Valia's sister, and she is a Reverend Mother. Travis Fimmel is, I believe, very good, and I'll be talking about performances later on, but I'm just setting up the whole story here. Travis Fimmel is Desmond Hart, and he is a very charismatic, very, the warrior with a swagger, right, in this film. But he seems to be working to try to gain the Emperor's trust and working to try and take on the Sisterhood, as we can tell from the opening episode, because it's just the first episode, basically, which has come out. Finally, the Emperor is, of course, Mark Strong. That is Emperor Javico Corino from the family Corino, who were the family who defeated the AI, because obviously, as we know in the Dune world, we see in Denis Villeneuve's film, AI does not exist anymore. And AI does not exist anymore because of the actions of Emperor Javico Corino and his family, who take on and defeat the AI, basically. And anyways, so those are the main protagonists of this series. To give you a general idea, I'm not going to give any spoilers here, no spoilers at all, but just a general idea. I will say that overall, as a narrative, the first episode has a massive job, right? You've got lots of different families to introduce, lots of different characters, lots of different narrative threads. And the episode itself suffers a little bit because of how many things it has to introduce. There's lots of monologues, lots of exposition. Well, it is necessary exposition. There is no way we can get through this film without this exposition being done on screen, which of course is part and parcel of the genre and part and parcel of Dune. Dune is a very long, very detailed book, and in the book itself, sometimes you have problems keeping up with all the different characters, let alone watching a 65-minute opening episode. But to stick, obviously, to talking just about the show, I will say, however, despite all these limitations, I think overall as a first episode, this is not a bad first episode. Now, does it have that strong narrative push that the first to 2021, I believe that was, Dune had? Definitely not. 100% it does not. The first Dune, and this is something that I believe happens also with the later books, with the later Dune books, is that the first Dune is a massive, sprawling, epic sci-fi adventure film, and the narrative pushes in a very, very fast pace, very fast, exciting pace. The rest of the books do not have that kind of strong pace, that kind of narrative push that the first one has. And you can see that clearly with this show, where you have a lot of political machinations, and the political machinations are fascinating to watch, at least so far in the first episode. You also have very interesting setting up of obviously the Bene Gesserit, and that is all done very well. And I'll get to the performances. The performances are fantastic in that element. However, it is rather slow. So if you're worried about the first Dune, the 2021 Dune being slow, wait till you watch the first episode, because it is a slow burn. However, let's get to the characters now, because I am quite intrigued with what's going on screen. It's just, now I am intrigued, but then it needs to hook me. I'm not completely hooked so far, but I am definitely intrigued. So with regard to the performances, I think the strongest performance is by our lead actress, that is Emily Watson. Typical fantastic performance by her, of course. And she is really strong in the lead role. She has a strong presence, very imposing, crafty and manipulative, imposing. You can tell her character is on a mission, right? Is on a mission, and she's determined, and no one is going to get in her way. And you will see that at once from the opening 10-15 minutes. So, and Emily Watson performs spectacularly. And with Emily Watson is, like I said, her sister in the show, of course, Sister Tula Harkonnen, and that is Olivia Williams. And I really believe there's a very strong chemistry between these two actors, Olivia Williams and Emily Watson. A very strong chemistry. They work well together. The dialogue between them is very strong as well. And I'll be talking about the screenplay later on as well. But the just focusing on Sister Tula and Mother Superior Valia Harkonnen, the dialogue between those two characters is very good. And they have a lot of solid stuff to work with. Now, I will say that those two performances are very good. I also say that Travis Fimmel is fantastic. He's charismatic. He's got, like I said, that swagger, where he is this is the kind of character you can imagine popping up in the Denis Villeneuve Dune films. And he would not be out of place at all. Fantastic performance by him as well. And a very strong ending for him. And I was very intrigued with the stuff Travis Fimmel was doing with his eyes and with his body language in one of his final scenes in this first episode. And that leads me to, of course, this is a slow burn like I've already said. But at the end of the episode, we have this sudden burst of violence, which is very interesting, very intriguing, and piqued my interest. And that is kind of what was like a bit of a hook, not completely. Like I said, I'm not completely hooked with this show. This is not the kind of show where I'll get home on Monday and boom, instantly go and watch it, but still one that I will follow and I will consistently follow if it maintains the quality of this first episode. You might be asking, but what about the production design? What about the visuals? Are they as strong as the Denis Villeneuve films? No, not as strong as the Denis Villeneuve films. Budgetary reasons, of course. This is a show, not a film. But still, I believe the quality shown, the production design, the sets are actually quite beautiful. Feel like they come from Denis Villeneuve's film. I think they're very strong, very solid, and there's good stuff there. The visuals as well, some of the CGI was pretty impressive as well. So overall, on a visual level, I would say I'm quite happy with it. I've seen some people compare this to a CW show, and I'm like, are we really watching the same thing here? Now, to be fair, there are a couple of scenes which I did not like. There's one particular scene which I really detested, which was a nightclub scene. Did not feel like Dune at all. Felt more like something from Blade Runner, for example, rather than Dune. But apart from that scene and a couple of scenes where I felt the dialogue was a little off, like I said, the screenplay is not always completely convincing, right? There is some dialogue which feels a little off, some interactions which again don't feel completely right. Overall, however, I will say that as a show, I'm very happy with what I've seen with the first episode. Quite happy, not very happy, quite happy with what I saw. Again, Emily Watson as Mother Superior, Valia Harkonnen, Olivia Williams, Sister Tula Harkonnen. Whenever they're interacting on screen, whenever we see the Bene Gesserit working and their machinations, political machinations with them involved, all well and good. The other stuff still needs to be developed, so we'll see how that works. But overall, I'm interested, and I will definitely be checking out episode 2 of Dune Prophecy. That comes, of course, out Sunday at 9 p.m. in the US, In Malta, of course, that would be 3 a.m. in the morning, and obviously we get to watch it Monday after work. So that is my first review for today. Viewers and listeners, I hope everyone is doing well. That was my first review of the day. Like I said, this is going to be quite a short episode, probably around 30 minutes long, not too much more, but actually a bit more, probably around 40 minutes long. I've got 2 more reviews to get into, and the first one, the second one now in this case, is a review for Emilia Perez. Emilia Perez, which released on Netflix last week. I'm not sure if it was Wednesday or Tuesday. Anyway, Wednesday or Tuesday, and released on Netflix. Now, to get into Emilia Perez, to say that the build-up for this release of Emilia Perez has been hyped would be an understatement, because, it's been propped up as a almost certainty for multiple Oscar nominations. Coming out of Cannes, critics were, piling on praise to no end for it. It won the jury prize, of course. Its female ensemble won the Best Actress. So, my expectations were definitely quite high for this film. Again, no spoilers for Emilia Perez, but I will say that maybe this was my mistake getting into it with very, very, very high expectations, because I don't think it is as strong as it is being portrayed by some critics. In my opinion, of course, it's always my opinion. But let's get into it, and I'll explain all my reasoning and my thoughts on Emilia Perez. So, to be clear, Emilia Perez is not a disappointment. It is well directed by Jacques Audiard. We've got a very impressive ensemble cast, which includes Zoe Saldana, we've got Carla Sofia Gascon, Selena Gomez, Adriana Paz, Mark Ivanir, and Edgar Ramir. So very strong cast. Now, Emilia Perez is the story of this cartel leader. And he, when we meet this cartel leader, we can tell he's an evil character, evil person, right? But this cartel leader, Manitas, wants to put an end to his evil deeds. And he instead wants to completely disappear and transition into being a woman. So apparently, from what we learned, Manitas always felt like he was not a man, he was a woman in a man's body. And so he enlists the help of a young lawyer, Rita Mora Castro, that is, of course, Zoe Saldana. We can tell she's a very tough but overworked lawyer. And Rita, we can tell at once, because, Zoe Saldana gives a fantastic performance in this. Rita is completely unsatisfied with all elements of her life, and she really feels underappreciated at work, overworked, like I said, little to no personal life, constantly exhausted with everything that's going on. And so Rita decides to accept Manitas' offer, and this leads her to a rather, incredible journey, which we see portrayed in the 2 hours of this film. Now, Emilia Perez is unabashedly a trans story. And, we see this, like I said, we see this evil cartel leader who transitions, and that will naturally make you question, leave you with a lot of ethical questions about what is going on screen. The film does an excellent job in setting up all these ethical questions and these dilemmas for the viewer. And I think that's one of the best things this film does. It makes you question, makes you think. And I was constantly thinking about the film after watching it. So that's always a sign of a good film, right? So, for example, Manitas was clearly not a good guy, and the film does a very good job in showing that. But once Manitas has transitioned into Emilia Perez, should Emilia Perez face any of the consequences of the actions that Manitas did? Emilia constantly refers to Manitas as a different person. But can we truly forgive her for Manitas' actions? Now, that's, of course, a subjective question, and everyone will approach that question the way they like. And I'd be fascinated to see the thoughts and how trans people have reacted to this film and what they think about all these ethical questions that this film poses, which are all very important, I believe, very relevant questions to ask today. However, it must also be said that throughout the film, of course, no spoilers, but I have to give somewhat the setup of this film. We do see Emilia Perez doing her best to try and make up for her past actions. And together with Rita, she sets up this non-profit organization. And this NGO is basically tasked with identifying the bodies of people who died due to cartel violence. So that is kind of one of the many narrative threads of this film. Another narrative thread of this film is, of course, what's going to happen to Manitas' family. 2 sons and a wife, Jessie. So at the start of the film, of course, when Emilia Perez transitions, Jessie and her sons are sent to Switzerland to live on their own, believing that Manitas was killed. And Rita helps with this transition as well. I'm using the transition, of course, as a way of speaking. However, slowly, Emilia Perez starts to feel that, the lack of her, specifically her sons, is leaving a big hole in her life, a big gap in her life. And so Emilia tasks Rita to bring Jessie and her sons back to Mexico to live with Emilia Perez, under the guise of Emilia Perez being a distant cousin of Manitas. Jessie does not recognize Manitas as Emilia Perez. And so what happens is Jessie returns to Mexico, but she returns on the condition of rekindling an old relationship with a Gustavo Brun. Now, Gustavo Brun apparently was this old lover with whom she had an affair when she was still married to Manitas. So all these different narrative threads. And then, of course, we've got the Rita narrative thread, we've got the NGO narrative thread, we've got the family thread, we've got, obviously, the relationship between Jessie and Gustavo, and then later on Emilia Perez and her own relationships that she develops. This is a packed plot, and you've got multiple character arcs, different narrative threads to follow, and that leads to some inconsistency with the screenplay. Some of the narrative threads work, some are a little weak. And I do believe that Emilia Perez works best when the full focus of the film and of the screenplay is on it being a crime thriller. And that is the best example I can give of all this, is the final sequence of this film, where you've got this breathtaking shootout, which is truly magnificently directed and shot. Really well done, well performed. Everything about it is very, very tense. Now, you might be wondering, but what the hell is it about these musical elements? Of course, there have been some scenes taken out of context of Emilia Perez, which show, completely out of context. So ignore those scenes on Twitter, right? Because watching them in context, they do make much more sense. But I will also admit that the musical elements of this film are very much a mixed bag. Some of the songs work, mostly when you've got either Zoe Saldana or Selena Gomez in the scene, because they are two very good performers. Zoe Saldana has one particularly very good scene in which she sings, she has a song basically, and she calls out various corrupt members of the government. You've got lawyers as well, judges and so on, and she calls them out. And the lighting, the whole choreography, the singing is all really well done in that scene. Unfortunately, I must say, though, that Saldana is also involved in one of the weaker songs. And here's when I go back to the out-of-context song I was referring to previously. This one song, which is sung in La Vaginoplastia, sorry for mispronouncing that, in Bangkok, and it feels completely off. And here's where I'm going to refer too quickly to the genre-bending element of this film. This is, of course, a film that shifts consistently in tone and genre throughout the whole film. And sometimes it shifts to humor, to a very, very jarring humor, which in this case, for example, I feel did not work at all. Sometimes rather a bit too absurd, in my opinion. Definitely a creative decision by the filmmaker, but one, obviously, that I clearly disagree with. Now, the film does very much rest on the shoulders of its three leads, and I think they are very well deserved award for them. I must start off with Carla Sofia Gascon, who is spectacular in the titular role. You know, her range as both the terrifying Manitas and the powerful Emilia Perez is very impressive. Like, very impressive performance there. So hats off to Carla Sofia Gascon. That's a fantastic performance from her. Zoe Saldana also showcases what an amazing talent she is, and I saw this review on Letterboxd and it really made me laugh. You know, and the joke was, you know, whenever Zoe Saldana is not painted green or blue, she is a bloody great actress, and you know, we can tell here, fantastic performance in this role, and a very good singer as well, surprisingly. Of course, not surprisingly, is the fact that Selena Gomez is also a very good singer. Now, her dramatic work could do with some work, with some improvement, but you know, her singing more than makes up for it. So overall, I will say that Emilia Perez is a bit of a mess. Yes, admittedly quite a big mess, but an enjoyable mess, one I had a rather good time watching, and my rating for Emilia Perez is a 3.5 out of 5. With regard to its Oscar possibilities, I'm pretty sure that when it comes to female lead performance, I believe Zoe Saldana will Carla Sofia Gascon will definitely be challenging, as I will assume will Zoe Saldana. I think with regard to Best Picture, I don't think this should ever be in the running for Best Picture. I think there are many other better films than Emilia Perez. But with regard to performances, I'd say cinematography and probably production design, I think this film, and definitely music, of course, this film definitely is in the run and deserves to be in the run for the Oscars. So viewers and listeners, let me know your thoughts on Emilia Perez in the chat or in the comment section below, and we will now move on to the final review of the day, and that is the big one, that is Gladiator 2. I'm just going to take a quick sip of water and we'll be back for Gladiator 2. All right, so let's get into it. Gladiator 2. Now, well, where do I start with this? I just finished writing my review. I'm going to use that as a basis for this video review, like I did with the Emilia Perez review as well. But Gladiator 2. So last night, leaving the cinema, I watched it with my family, and the question burning in my head was, how essential to a film's quality is a good screenplay? Like, how much importance should I give to a good screenplay? And how much importance should I give to just, having a good time watching a film, enjoying it, having a blast, watching some good fights? Where do we balance that as reviewers, right? And then that is a very important question. I think is very relevant to many reviewers. Because, of course, when we go into the cinema, we want to have a good time. We want to be entertained, right? I'm referring, obviously, to Gladiator, the first Gladiator. As intellectually stimulating as something might be, we go into the cinema to have fun, to have a good time. And Gladiator 2 definitely does not face the problem of being intellectually stimulating or at all boring, because Gladiator 2 is not a boring film. It is a fun film, but a fun film with a lot of problems. Let's get into it. So, let's start off with, of course, the setup of Gladiator 2. It is obviously a sequel to the original 2000 film, and I have to say, it is rather a step down in pretty much, I would say, all of its aspects, right? Still, like I said, had a good time in the cinema. It's the kind of film you go in, take out the popcorn, munch on your popcorn, watch some fights, and leave, and basically miss nothing. But also quite sad to think about it. Now that I'm thinking about the film, I've been thinking quite a bit about the film recently. It's not a very memorable film, is it? Not a very memorable film at all. Now, just to let you know, viewers and listeners, I will not be going into any spoilers for Gladiator 2. Literally no spoilers at all. But the film does a lot of hand-holding. Now, the person in charge of the script was David Scarpa, and we can tell he's also the person who took care of the Napoleon screenplay. And just like Napoleon, one of the biggest issues with this film is its screenplay. So, the plot for Gladiator 2 starts some 15 years after the events of the first film, and we follow Paul Mescal's Hanno, who lives in Numidia with his wife. Hanno's city, Numidia, is invaded basically by a Roman army under the leadership of General Marcus Acatius, and that is Pedro Pascal. Hanno is forced into slavery and becomes a gladiator under the rule of Denzel Washington's Macrinus, who is a slave lord with great ambition. Other important characters in this film is the returning Connie Nielsen as Lucilla, of course, and we've got two emperors this time, and not one. We've got Emperors Gaeta, that's Joseph Quinn, and Emperor Caracalla, that's Fred Hershinger. And that is probably one of the few, the fact that there are two emperors and not one of the few historically accurate elements of this film. Now, Ridley Scott's film is a complete mess. Complete mess in all its storytelling, right? Especially when it comes to the kind of tension that the film apparently hopes to develop, because it's something that is focused on quite a bit, with regard to the whole, who is Paul Mescal's character related to narrative. From the opening scene, it is made quite obvious as to who Paul Mescal is, right? Who is Hanno. And, the film goes into, painstaking work with regard to its scripted screenplay in trying to make sure, you will 100% definitely have guessed who Paul Mescal is, who he's related to, why is he important. David Scarpa and Ridley Scott, who really are adapting their work for the lowest common denominator here. Now, most of what happens on screen also makes little to no logical sense here. Forget the whole historical inaccuracies argument. I spent a lot of time on the Napoleon review talking about historical inaccuracies. I give importance to that because I love my history. But forget the whole historical inaccuracies film, aspect. We do see kids playing football. That's the kind of film we're talking about here. But whenever you watch a scene and dissect it, you will have 100 questions in your head filled with different logical fallacies. The monster apes, for example, that whole scene made absolutely no sense from start to finish. And it just makes absolutely no sense. But that's just one of the many negatives I have to mention for this film, unfortunately. Another negative element of this film, which is, again, related to the very weak screenplay, is the dialogue. We've got an amazing cast here. I mentioned all the different great actors in this cast. And unfortunately, they have little to nothing to work with here. Pedro Pascal, completely wasted. His plot resolves in such an unsatisfactory fashion. Pascal is really doing his best to just act with his charisma and screen presence, because that's all he can work with. No script at all is helping him here. Nothing at all. And you can only do so much. But then, of course, is the exception. Then we've got Denzel Washington, who completely outperforms everyone in this film through just, again, his screen presence and that bloody intoxicating laugh of his. He walks around with an impressive swagger, and your eyes are constantly stuck to him. He is a scene stealer if ever I seen one. And he walks around as if he owns the whole of Rome, which I guess he kind of does, right? And this screen presence is really, really impressive. Finally, we have to talk about the lead actor when it comes to performances, right? Now, I've seen a lot of criticism being piled onto Paul Mescal, and I do agree to a certain extent that he is no Russell Crowe. He at this point in time of his career. We have, of course, seen Paul Mescal mostly in a lot of indie films, right? And Gladiator 2 is anything but an indie film, right? However, Mezcal is, I believe, not as bad as many people are saying he is. Of course, again, always in my opinion. And the problem here is I think many people are contrasting him with Russell Crowe, which is a problem because Paul Mescal starts off this film in a different place to where Russell Crowe's Maximus started the first film. In this film, we see Mescal transitioning from a common soldier to a leader, which is a completely different character arc to the one we saw, of course, Russell Crowe in the first film. And so I believe people went in expecting to see Mescal as this commanding presence from the start of the film, which clearly he should not be, right? Now, how well does Mescal show this transition? I think that's probably one of the best aspects of his performance, to see that transition from being a common soldier to becoming a leader of men. Now, my big issue with Mescal's performance is that I'm constantly hearing characters refer to Hanno as this gladiator with so much pent-up rage, so much violence, his will for revenge. And I just could not see it in Mescal, especially I couldn't see it in his eyes. He does have one or two strong moments, but overall I will say a rather tame, if not poor performance. Give me 1 second, guys. I need to take a sip of water and I'll be back with my review. All right. Moving on and, coming to a conclusion because my voice can only take so much constant talking. My final issue with the screenplay is the fact that the film never makes an attempt to diversify itself from the first film. This feels very much like a retread of the first film. Incredibly derivative. Sometimes almost feels like it's a parody, to be perfectly honest. We see scenes playing out almost exactly the same themes, same concepts. Plot moves very similarly, and I do believe Ridley Scott really did not care at all about the plot here. This is just an excuse to make massive gladiatorial fights, which admittedly he could of course not do in the late 90s due to technological restrictions and maybe budgetary restrictions as well. And he loves those D-Day scenes, doesn't he? The opening scene really reminded me of the Robin Hood medieval D-Day scene at the end, in the climactic scene of the Ridley Scott Robin Hood film. But this, of course, is a good transition to the best aspect of this film, which is the action. Now, whenever we see burly men swinging swords at each other, Gladiator 2 works very, very well. Still, not as strong as the first film, but the thing is here, in the first film, the action was very good, right? The gladiatorial fight, spectacular. The fights in the second film are even more spectacular in the scale of what we see in the Colosseum. But the issue is that we don't really care about the characters in this second Gladiator, whilst we definitely cared about the characters in the first Gladiator. So that's a big issue with the action itself. But just looking at it on a visual aspect, the fights are really impressively done. The choreography, the whole aspect, the whole epic aspect of it all, really well done. The ship scenes, ship battles that we see in the trailer, brilliant. Really impressive stuff. So tip my hat off to Ridley Scott and his direction in those scenes. Really impressive stuff. Now, Ridley Scott had to have also a bit too much fun in some of these gladiatorial fights, and that has shown a lot on the screen itself. CGI apes, CGI sharks. Did we really need them? Not to mention, the CGI on some of those animals was horrendous. Really bad CGI. There were quite a few people laughing at some of those scenes, and I don't think they were laughing with the film. They were laughing at the film, because that shark looked like something out of a PlayStation 1 video game, honestly. So, still, I will say, however, that Gladiator 2 is a visually pleasing film. The sets, the costumes, beautifully done, very impressive stuff. And yes, some of the CGI is actually quite good in this film. I mean, for example, whenever we see, a landscape shot of the Grand Harbor, of course, a lot of the Grand Harbor has to be removed. For example, changing churches to temples. That stuff, that subtle stuff, is done really, really well. The CGI aspect on those is really well done. But another good thing I have to mention about those scenes as well, I was going to forget to mention, is, the Gladiator 2 is a busy film. A lot of scenes are bustling with activity, whether it's lots of gladiators, whether it's lots of people running around on screen, on set. And, it never feels like it's too much for the viewer to keep up with, which is testament, again, to Ridley Scott's very good direction, and also testament to the excellent job done by the Maltese crews whilst working on Gladiator 2. And that is the stunt work, the production, and so on. Again, swords, the armor, all look really good. So hats off to the production design team. A very well-deserved Oscar nomination is definitely coming for them. So, in conclusion, how did I leave the cinema? I left the cinema feeling like I had watched an okay film, a decent film. I left feeling like this was a classic 3 out of 5 film. Unfortunately, the more I thought about it, the more I thought about, the crazy antics that Ridley Scott was trying to one-up his first film with. I started to notice even more what an inferior copy this film is. And you might be saying, but why are you comparing the two? I have to compare the two because the film never tries to set off on its own narrative. The film never tries to do its own thing. It is literally a retread of the first film, constantly showing scenes from the first film, constantly making references to the first film, whether visual, with regard to the armor, sword, whether it's quotes, constantly quoting the first film. So, it's impossible not to compare the two when the plot is pretty much the same in both. And that's a big, big issue with this film, right? It never stands on its own 2 feet. So ultimately, I have to say that yes, despite an amazing Denzel Washington chewing all the scenery, yes, despite the fun, action, gladiatorial fights, yes, despite the very good production design, the sets, some of the CGI, which is awful, some of the CGI, which is very good. Despite all of these different positive aspects, Gladiator 2 is a rather disappointing film. Not a bad film, not an awful film, but rather disappointing. And it's the same feeling I had as when I watched Deadpool and Wolverine. It's not a bad film, and I'm pretty sure Gladiator 2 will work for a lot of people. Unfortunately, the very dumb screenplay really, really kind of ruined it for me. And, the big issue is that although I respect the fact that, Ridley Scott proudly parades the actions and heroics of the first film, he never really sets off on a new story. He never sets off on anything independent from the first film. Everything rests on the shoulders of the first film. And ultimately what that does is simply remind you, the viewer, and remind me, how much better that first film, that masterpiece of a first film, really was when compared to the second film. So viewers and listeners, those are my thoughts on Gladiator 2. My rating for Gladiator 2 is a disappointing 2.5 out of 5. So viewers and listeners, thank you so much for following this admittedly very short podcast, 45 minutes, but 45 minutes of non-stop reviews. It was very tiring for myself. I will end the podcast here. Thank you so much to all the viewers and listeners who joined the podcast today. Let me know in the comment section below your thoughts about Gladiator 2, your thoughts about Emilia Perez, and your thoughts about Dune Prophecy if you have checked them out. And if you have not, are you interested in checking them out? Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. And I'll see you guys next week on our next episode of the Ad Lib Podcast.